What's going on, everybody? I'm your host, Ben Ballion, back with another episode of the Sports Pod. And today is part 2 of the 82-part series where I will recap every single Knicks game from this regular season. A couple of nights ago, they squared off with the hated Atlanta Hawks. Of course, they had that playoff series way back in 2021 where Trae Young became one of the villains of the Garden, knocked the Knicks off pretty much single-handedly in 5 games that year. But the Knicks got the best of them the other night and picked up their first win of the season. So let's go recap that game out in State Farm Arena. So starting with the shooting from that game. That's where I want to start for today. Before that game, I previewed it a little bit in the last episode, and I said that the Knicks needed to take more threes. And they did just that. Jalen Brunson knocked down a career high of 8 threes, and I think it was because he was attacking more than the Celtics game. He was getting more buckets and driving more at the start, and then they would kind of lay back on him because they were anticipating the drive, and he would shoot the ball, and it was going in, which was good. And it rubbed off on other guys also, like DiVincenzo and Grimes. Both had big games. DiVincenzo had his first points as a Knick. Although it wasn't a three, it was a really nice backdoor cut and something that I think he does really well. When somebody dribbles at him, he'll backdoor cut, just like they teach you how to do in 5th grade. And he'll get to the basket, and he gets a nice reverse layup every time. But he hasn't made it all that much, which I'm not worried about. It's a very tough shot to make. And he keeps getting it, which is good. He's always wide open, and the other players do a really good job at finding him on the baseline. So, if he continues to do that, they're going to start playing back on him because they know he's going to cut, and then even he'll be able to shoot more three-pointers. And that's really what we brought him here to do. Have a lot of energy, shoot three-pointers, and be another guy like Josh Hart, who just has energy. He's always running around there, hustling for loose balls, always on the floor. And he's done a really good job at it so far. But getting back to Brunson, I mentioned how the defense would lay back on him. Defense from the Hawks sucked the other day. They were, I don't even know if they were playing defense. DeJounte Murray, who is a really good defender, he was non-existent in that game. DeJounte Murray, he had 18 points, but then on the defensive end, he had a steal and a block, but he wasn't a factor at all in that game, which surprises me because he's someone who's tough and he's a player who's going to get his points and stuff and his stats, but he didn't, which is surprising to me. Because I was watching the game, and I'm like, where's DeJounte Murray? I know he's on this team, and I saw him in the starting lineup, but I don't remember Breen calling his name once during the broadcast. So, he was a non-factor, which was good for the Knicks. And Trae Young was really a non-factor also. He only had 18 points, which for Trae Young standards is not that much, especially against the Knicks. And he had a really bad shooting night, and a lot of credit for that goes to my guy, Quentin Grimes. Always going out there and guarding the best player every single night. Always hustling. Always shooting the ball. And he's another guy that got going by the three-pointers. And he'll lock up anyone. Quickly always says that the Knicks are a bunch of dogs. Grimes is a dog. So he went out on opening night, and he did a pretty good job at guarding Jason Tatum. It could have been better, but Tatum's a top 5 scorer in the league. So he got his points, obviously, 34 of them. But then coming out and locking up Trae Young, who he isn't as talented as Jason Tatum by any means, but he's still a very talented player and a good scorer in the NBA. And Grimes went out there. he knocked him off his game early, and Trae Young didn't do anything to help the Hawks win. Although, except he didn't have a good shooting night, but he did pass the ball well. Something that I thought Randall did again. Randall had another bad shooting night, which is kind of worrying me now. But he did have 9 assists with only 1 turnover, which for him to go out there and have 16 assists in the first 2 games is very surprising to me. Because Randall's a guy that doesn't pass the ball much. I mentioned it a couple episodes ago when I was talking about my worries going into the season. And one of them was that Randall didn't pass the ball enough. But if he could keep this up and he can continue sharing the rock and not turning it over a bunch of times, which I think is the bigger part of it and the part that he might not be able to do, I think he'll be an all-star again, and he might even make another All-NBA team. 3rd team, not 1st team, but him and Brunson might both be on that 3rd team this season. All right, moving on to some of the defensive talk in this game. There was really no defense. I was on Instagram and I was, I forget who put it out there, but somebody said that it looked like an AAU basketball game and that there was no defense and nobody wanted to shoot layups. Everybody was shooting threes from both sides. It wasn't just the Knicks. And there were a total of 76 three-pointers taken in this game. I don't know how that stacks up to some of the other games that there are, but that seems like a lot to me. And as I was watching it, it seemed like every possession was a three-pointer. And then when it wasn't a three-pointer, Jalen Carter was jumping to the moon. Oh my God, he had a poster slam over Hartenstein and Hart, that was a big-time dunk. And then he could jump out of the building. It was impressive to me to see how high he could jump. But even then, the Hawks didn't have it the other day. They just didn't have it. And I give a lot of credit. I already gave credit to Grimes, and I'm going to give a lot of credit to Robinson because he played so well against this Atlanta Hawks team who has Clint Capella, who I think Robinson is better, but they're pretty close. Robinson's probably like 1 or 2 spots better than him in the ranking of centers in the NBA. But Robinson, as always, was insistent on the glass, grabbing offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds, blocking shots, getting steals. He even knocked down 2 free throws in a row, which for Robinson, that's really good. So, I am very happy with the way that Mitchell Robinson played. And it all started because he stayed out of foul trouble. And that is something that Robinson does not do very often. And even in the opener, he had, I think it was 3 fouls in the first half. And it forces Hartenstein to play. And Hartenstein's a good player, but Robinson is light years ahead of him in terms of talent and rebounding ability. So, it was very good that Robinson was able to do this. He finished with 11 rebounds, 7 points, 4 blocks, and 4 steals. If he could do that every game, I would be incredibly happy. That would be a huge. He would be even bigger of a part of this team. And he's the longest tenured Knick. I just found that out the other day. He was part of the 2018-19 team that won like 17 games or something. And he's the only Knick that's still on that team from that season. And he stayed out of foul trouble. And it wasn't like he was laying back and not going up for as many shots. He was hustling back on transition, I thought, more than ever. he played an amazing game. A lot of credit to him. I already mentioned what Quentin Grimes did, knocking Trae Young off his game early and just going out there and hustling. And that's what Dante DiVincenzo came in and did also. DiVincenzo was all over the court. He had a couple steals, I know, and it felt like he was everywhere. He had one steal and one block, but he was on the floor a couple times. He dove to keep a ball in play. I don't think it stayed in play, but it showed that he was hustling. And he wants it just more than anybody else does. And one person I haven't been that impressed by this year is Josh Hart. He's been playing his minutes, but he hasn't really done anything. I mean, he had a couple rebounds, only 4 points, but he hasn't been the guy that he was last year. And the same thing with Randall, which I don't know if that's necessarily good or bad. And it's only been 2 games. It's a small sample size for both players. So I'm not going to judge it too hard, but he just hasn't looked as energetic and as he just hasn't looked like the same player. And someone who did look like the same player he was last year, and even a little bit better, I've talked about him all day, Jalen Brunson. He looked tremendous in this game, back to the player he was last year after having a bad first game. But I don't know how I'm going to judge this game because the Hawks, I don't know how good of a team they are, and they didn't play any defense. Like Trae Young, he sucks at defense. And that's why they have DeJounte Murray to cover him up in that backcourt. But if DeJounte Murray can't be an all-star defender, then they're going to get exposed. And we saw it with the Knicks last night. But even down the stretch, Jalen Brunson, who I mentioned was really good, he was turning the ball over a little bit. And he said it, and he really called himself out in the post-game interview. He said something about it would be great if I could learn how to stop turning the ball over late, which shows us that he wants more. He wants to bring a championship to New York. He wants to be immortalized as one of the greatest to ever do it in New York. And that is what we need. He's so tough. He's a little bit undersized, but he makes it up. He draws charges. He does whatever the team needs him to. He's our best scorer. He's our best passer. He does anything and everything that we need him to. And going back to the Hawks defense, it was just like they just wanted to play offense. And this is still what I was saying about the AAU basketball thing I read. It was like they weren't guarding the pick and roll. They weren't guarding the Knicks 3-point shooting. They were letting guys drive and take mid-range jumpers, which is becoming more and more common. Like RJ had a nice move where he pump faked, he dribbled to the foul line, one dribble, took a nice pull-up jump shot, and swished it. Like, I'll take that out of RJ. He's looked really good in these first 2 games. He's shot the 3-ball better than he ever has. He's going to the basket. He's gotten to the line. And if he could keep this up for the season, or the rest of the season, this is going to keep him in a Knick uniform. And the 3-point shooting has been the biggest part of it for me because we have had it, I guess, but in the first game, him and Quickly were the only ones that were shooting it. But the Knicks, that was just, it was like they were keeping the Hawks, like they were keeping them close. They would let the Hawks get back into the game, and then they would pull away again. They had an 11-point lead a couple times, and the Hawks would cut it to 2, and then they would pull away again. It was almost like they were walking, like the Knicks were walking a dog that was the Hawks, and they had them on a leash, and they were extending the leash and bringing it back in closer. And then finally at the end, they made a couple buckets after 2 ill-advised turnovers, as Clyde Frazier would say. They called a timeout. They got settled down. They got a big bucket. And then it was free throw shooting for the rest of the game. And the free throw shooting was better than it was against the Celtics. And it allowed them to win the game. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. But before I end, just make sure to check out the Instagram and the YouTube channels for the Sports Pod. The Instagram is at the Sports Pod _Ben. You could find bonus content and behind the scenes content over there. And for the YouTube, it's the Sports Pod _ for video podcasts and some bonus content. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. I'm your host, Ben Valian, and that's going to do it for the Sports Pod.